Ladies and gentlemen, I am SidAlpha. I know that I promised this review some time ago, and despite my best efforts, more important news always seemed to crop up and get in the way. But, as I always fulfill my promises, we will finally answer the question that is written in the stars, is it worth it? And this is, at long last, a first impressions look at Pyre by SuperGiant Games. Now, I call this a first impression because even though this game has been out for quite some time already, I have only managed to put in about 7 hours of actual game time, and while I do have a firm grasp of the basics, there is a good amount of complexity to the game that I feel will take a much more significant time investment than there are hours in the day for me right now. But before we get into the meat of things, let's take a quick look at the options menu. Now, in the first screen, we have fairly standard fare for the brightness, cursor speed, and audio sliders, as well as an aim assist option for those that would wish to make use of a controller over keyboard and mouse, which works well enough, but for this game, I would highly recommend making use of the keyboard and mouse for this particular game. You also have 3 difficulty settings, reduced, standard, or heightened, as well as a selector for whatever pronoun you would prefer your character to be referred by, and there is a male, female, and other option. Now, in the controls section, we do have fully rebindable controls for mouse and for controller, as well as specialized defaults for both standard W, A, S, and D keys for those more comfortable with first-person shooter games, and also a Q, W, E, and R default layout for those who are more comfortable with strategy games. And then the display settings with all of your normal screen resolutions, all fairly basic and fairly standard. There are a good amount of options missing from this menu, but given the aesthetics of the game, the majority of those options like ambient occlusion adjustments and anti-aliasing settings are actually superfluous, and I actually feel that in this game, their presence would not really serve any legitimate purpose. However, there are no color deficiency settings, which is something to be aware of. Now, within the game itself, you play as the character who is known as the Reader, a person exiled from their home in the Commonwealth to what seems to be a cursed land that is called the Downside. Once a person is sent to the Downside, there is no escape, no way to get back to the Commonwealth outside of the rites, mystical trials devised by the 8 scribes that take the form of a sporting event. Now, in this sporting event, there are 9 teams, or triumvirates, that you will vie against in order to battle your way through to the Liberation Rite, upon which the victors are able to choose one of their number to be pardoned of their crimes and be sent back to the Commonwealth. Now, the lore within this world is extremely extensive, coming with a 100-page encyclopedia whose pages you unlock as you progress through the game. It reminds me of sort of an abridged Silmarillion to the world of Pyre, and it does very much read like a textbook. I found the lore contained within to be fairly fascinating at first, but it eventually became somewhat dry. Regardless, it's there for those that want it, but it was implemented in such a way as to be secondary to the game as a whole, providing depth, but able to be discarded if one so chooses without impacting the overall story of the game itself. And as for the game proper, outside of the rites, it is part visual novel and part choose-your-own-adventure with solid yet simplistic and still effective animations. The art design I found to be fantastic, and the characters themselves to be unique, if somewhat slightly trope-filled at times. Now, I don't want to go into the story itself too much out of fear of spoiling it for people that haven't experienced it yet, and also because even at 8 hours in, I am nowhere near the end of the story itself, so I don't even know what the ending is. But as with everything, the core mechanics of the gameplay itself is what is ultimately the important aspect of the game, and SuperGiant Games did not disappoint in this score. The gameplay feels very much like a mystical form of basketball, where you have 2 pyres, of course, and a ball that must be carried or thrown into the enemy team's pyre. Upon completing that task, the flame of their pyre is diminished until it goes out completely, and once that is accomplished, the match is over. To achieve this end, you have a fairly wide variety of teammates to select from, each with their own stats and abilities. Some fast runners, others slower, and still others that are flyers. Each one of them has an aura about them that is used for both offensive and defensive actions. When moving about, each of them has an aura that encircles them. If this comes into contact with someone on the opposing team, their spirits are temporarily dissipated. They are then forced to remain off of the play area for the duration of a cooldown timer before reappearing. This will allow for you to, if you act quickly enough, to remove the entire enemy team from play for a short duration, allowing you to make a shot completely unopposed. Now, in addition, your players are able to focus their auras in order to shoot them at the opposing team. Now, once done, this will cause a brief moment where they are all but defenseless, so as with everything within the game, there is a carefully balanced trade-off for each action and reaction. Now, in addition, there is a leveling aspect with multiple selections that will allow you to customize the abilities of each character, and each of them is allowed to carry an item with them that grants special considerations or enhances their native abilities. One item might afford them a larger aura, a quicker recharge, a chance to respawn immediately if dispersed, or to collect additional gold, or even to increase the strength of your team's Pyre, making it more difficult for your opponents to claim victory. These items are extremely varied, as is their abilities, and even those can be enhanced or upgraded with purchased upgrades that you can get through the shop that shows up periodically. Now, the gameplay at first is fairly linear, forcing you to encounter other triumvirates in a specific order until you complete your first liberation rite. This allows for a natural progression for you to be introduced to the game and its mechanics, and its tutorials are actually quite well done. They explain the game, its controls, and your different abilities quite well, and I didn't feel that I had to figure too much out on my own. Now, after that, the game opens up immensely, and you have a great more depth and detail when it comes to choices and the other teams you face and in which order you face them. Now, the game does also have a local multiplayer option, but there is no online multiplayer option available, which is a little disappointing. I would have hoped for at least friend play to be available online, but they decided to keep it local only. The game as a whole, though, is lovely to look at. The characters are diverse and interesting, and the gameplay is surprisingly good. I'm normally not a fan of sports games at all, but I enjoy the hell out of Pyre, and this game does have a great amount of replayability given the gameplay design, customization of items, and of characters. And for $20, there is no question in my mind that this game is worth every penny and more. I never thought I would find myself recommending a sports game to anyone for any reason, but Pyre is just that damn good. And again, my apologies for the lateness of this first impression. I know that it's not exactly a relevant review anymore given how much time has passed, but a promise is indeed a promise, and I do my best to keep my promises whenever possible. But as always, please do let me know what you think down in the comments below. And once again, ladies and gentlemen, I am SidAlpha, and I'll see you next time.